Good morning. Hey, y'all ready for the baseball game? Tomorrow, yeah. I hope it doesn't rain. So. Well, good morning, everybody. I want to start out with just reminding everybody of earlier this year, Vice President Vance's anti-fraud task force led the charge to suspend 447 hospices and 23 home health care centers. And he did that because those agencies were tied to more than $600 million in suspected fraud. But here's the catch. That was in just Los Angeles. That was in one city, Los Angeles. 447 hospices and 23 home health care agencies. Think about that for 1 minute. Think about the hundreds of families that have lost a loved one and later found out they were scammed. Then they find out their loved one wasn't receiving the care that they needed and the services that they were actually paying for. Think about the devastation for those families. This is more common than you'd like to think. There are hundreds of these agencies operating, exploiting vulnerable patients and their families in their most difficult period of times of their life. That's why House Republicans are fighting fraud. We're working to actually protect taxpayer dollars and root out the abuse. That's common sense. You know what's crazy? Democrats vote to protect the criminals. Just look at the vote last week, right? And I'll remind everybody that I say every single solitary week, every single Democrat voted to raise your taxes. Voted to raise your taxes and not have oversight on where that money is going. You want to know why? Because it's not their money. But they want more of their money to put in the fraudster's pocket. That's crazy. They didn't vote to stop fraud. They didn't vote to protect taxpayers. They voted to take more money from hardworking Americans. Meanwhile, Republicans are continuing to find and root out the waste, fraud, and abuse already buried in the system. So one that I want to highlight this week, in California, one fraudster, Paul Richard Randall, super nice guy here, he recently pled guilty to submitting $270 million in fraudulent Medicare claims for medically unnecessary prescription drugs, many of which never even were given to the patients. This is the guys that the Democrats are protecting. This guy, what a nice guy. He benefited $270 million while people didn't get the care that they needed. That's sick. This is disgusting. And I hope they put this guy away for a long, long time. He took advantage of a temporary loophole in the system, flooding Medicaid with fraudulent claims and pocketing millions of dollars. Real swell guy, huh? Now he faces up to 30 years behind bars for ripping off the Americans. You know what that is? That's theft. That's theft of your hard-earned tax dollars. That's stealing from you. That's stealing from vulnerable Americans. And that's stealing from every family that expects these programs to actually help the people that they're designed to help. These people got to be put away. I mean, these people are ripping off your money, and the Democrats want to raise your taxes, and they want to vote no on all the on Republicans' bills to uncover the fraud. Why is that? You got to ask yourself, why is that? Why do they want to protect people like this? It's crazy, right? It's stealing from every single family that expects these programs to actually help them. Republicans actually believe taxpayer dollars should go to the people who deserve them, not the fraudsters. That's why we're exposing these schemes, holding criminals accountable, and protecting taxpayer dollars, your dollars. That's why this week we will vote on legislation again to crack down on fraud in the government. Because before Democrats in Washington ask you for one more dollar, they should stop letting the criminals steal those dollars from hardworking Americans. And with that, I'll turn it over to our whip, Mr. Emmer. I'll take that.
One of these days, I'm going to see how far that goes. Thanks to a new bombshell report from James Comer and the Oversight Committee, we know that Tim Walz and Keith Ellison knew about fraud long before they had said they knew about it previously. Tim Walz and Keith Ellison had 7 years to stop the fraud in Minnesota. Instead, they did nothing while letting billions flow to Somali fraudsters. It wasn't until President Trump made this a national issue that Walz and Ellison even started to pretend to care about their state-run programs, bankrolling lavish lifestyles for Somali fraudsters. My state's so-called leaders claim ignorance, but this report proves that they knew there was rampant fraud in Minnesota. Not only did the Walz administration know about the fraud and look the other way, the report reveals they even retaliated against whistleblowers who tried to stop it. Chairman Comer's report confirms what we all know to be true. Walz and Ellison created the perfect conditions for fraud, knowingly looked the other way when it was discovered and committed, and left hard-working taxpayers, disabled Americans that our conference chair was just referring to, and hungry children out to dry in the process. All because they were afraid of being called racist. Somali fraudsters may be holding the smoking gun, but Walz and Ellison handed it to them, locked and loaded. Thankfully, the Trump administration is putting an end to fraud in this country. The White House Fraud Task Force is turning off the spigots. The Department of Justice is prosecuting the fraudsters, and just last night, Vice President J.D. Vance announced he is referring the Walz-Flanagan-Ellison administration failures to act on the DOI's new fraud division for criminal investigation. He's going to refer it to the new task force. Here in the House, Republicans are strengthening government programs to defend against fraud and serve the vulnerable Americans they are actually intended for. The contrast could not be more clear. While Democrats facilitate fraud, Republicans tackle it head on. And we'll be doing even more of that this week. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Somali fraudsters and their enablers can't hide from accountability. With that, I'll turn it over to our leader, Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Whip. As the Whip discussed, we're bringing a number of additional bills this week to combat fraud, and it's something that we've been seeing, we've been exposing, we've been bringing more tools forward so that we can root out fraud to protect taxpayers. And it's not just taxpayers who suffer. It's a lot of these programs that were intended to help mostly low-income people, kids with disabilities. If you think about some of the Minnesota fraud that's going on and the quote-unquote Leering centers that you all now know about, that money was intended for students, for children. In some cases, children with autism, where that money was stolen by fraudsters. And the government, Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, looked the other way. They knew what was going on. Whistleblowers have been telling us that. And they looked the other way and let the fraud continue and let the theft of that money continue. And again, it's not just billions, tens of billions of dollars stolen from taxpayers. It's money that's not going to people who need it. People with disabilities, senior citizens. Dr. Oz has talked about some of the fraud that he's seen in programs like hospice, where criminal organizations, not just individuals, in some cases, foreign countries operating with criminal entities and enterprises are setting up shops to steal tens of billions of dollars, in some cases taking programs away from people, healthcare programs away and forcing people into things that they don't need, taking away benefits they paid into their whole life. and those dollars are gone, and we're now working to root it out. And you would think this would be an initiative that everybody in Congress would work on together. I wish it was. Sadly, you saw the vote last week. We brought a bill forward to root out fraud in child care centers. So it's not just suspected fraud, but if somebody's actually convicted of stealing money from child care programs, we've had a bill that says you can't participate anymore if you've already stolen money from taxpayers. And do you know that 98% of Democrats on the House floor last week voted against that bill? 98% of Democrats voted to protect the fraudsters who are stealing money from child care programs. That's who Democrats are protecting. They're protecting criminals who are stealing money from children. It's that basic. So we're going to continue to bring more bills to protect the taxpayers of this country, to root out the fraud that we're seeing. We're also, of course, bringing a bill later today on Reconciliation 2.0 to fully fund the Department of Homeland Security. The final piece, as you know, is to fund ICE and border protection. This is a piece that Democrats have said they don't want to fund because they want open borders. They have made it crystal clear, the Democrat Party in Washington, that they want to go back to open borders, and we're not going to do that. We need to fully fund this department, especially at a time of heightened security threats. We also need to make sure that we renew FISA. One of the reasons that the Speaker's not here right now is he's over at the White House working with the President to finalize this agreement on FISA. You have the bill over in the Senate. We, of course, passed a bill to have a long-term renewal of FISA. The bill is over in the Senate. They're having negotiations right now, and hopefully they get it resolved. We stand ready to move that bill as soon as it's resolved in the Senate. But, hopefully that happens today, tomorrow. But it's important that that program does not go dark on Friday when it expires, because just understand, FISA has been used time and time again to stop terrorist attacks here on our homeland, on American soil, to prevent terrorist attacks. And that's a critical tool that we need to renew. So a lot of other things going on. I will point out a Truth Social post that Marlon Stutzman put out over the weekend, chronicling, a lot of you may be familiar, the Chicago Bears are looking at moving right now to Indiana. Yes, the Chicago Bears playing in Indiana. And you would ask why. He literally lays out in brutal detail how Democrats at all levels in Chicago and the state of Illinois literally ran the Chicago Bears out of Chicago and out of the state of Illinois. And I think it's just important to point out, when you look at what's coming up and what's the difference between the two parties, how one party, literally after 100 years of the Chicago Bears playing football in Chicago, they're going to ultimately end up playing in Indiana, and they didn't want to. They wanted to stay, but now a multi-billion-dollar program with jobs, with tax revenue, all of that is going to leave the state of Illinois because they ran it out of the state through very specific actions that Marlon Stutzman chronicled. With that, finally, hopefully I see a lot of you out tomorrow night at the baseball game. Republicans will be playing the Democrats in a spirited competition. It is officially now a sellout. 38,000 tickets have been sold, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. And over $3 million for local charities raised already in the bank. And that's something we're very proud of. It helps a lot of youth programs here in the District of Columbia, and it's something that Republicans and Democrats come together to do. We want to beat the Democrats. We beat them last year 13-2. We want to beat them again, but we also come together to raise money for a really good cause. Hope to see all of you there. And with that, we'll be happy to take some questions. Yes?
Thank you, Peter. You both talked about the importance of protecting the taxpayers. So I want to know, yes or no, if the $1.8 billion weaponization fund is a good use of taxpayer funds.
Well, there is no weaponization fund, as you know. That was fought back and forth. I know the president's talked about it. It was initially part of the discussion on Reconciliation 2.0 in the Senate, but as the Senate grappled with it, it was one of the final pieces that they dealt with. They chose not to put in place a weaponization fund, so the bill we have in the House does not have any funding for a weaponization fund. Yeah.
Sir, last week the House passed the Ukraine Support Act. Why was the leadership of your conference against putting this bill on the table?
Well, it was a discharge petition that went around some of the negotiations that are going on right now. If you look, there are negotiations going on in earnest between the Congress and the White House to put stronger sanctions against Russia. All of us, and I've supported this conflict on the Ukrainian side so that they can win. I mean, they've been incredibly heroic and brave in this fight. We want to see more pressure put on Russia, and there is a better approach right now being taken, better than the bill that was before us. Frankly, I think the bill that was voted on last week undermines some of those efforts to put more pressure on Russia. So the negotiations are ongoing to have a stronger sanctions bill against Russia to help Ukraine even more.
The president keeps saying that the California election was rigged. What evidence have you seen to show that there's been widespread fraud that has caused this election to be stolen?
Well, if you look over the years, what our concerns have been is on this wide scale where they mail ballots to everybody and then they have vote harvesting in California. And other states do this too, not many, but in states that do, I think where you really have a lot of voter anger, and you're seeing it in Los Angeles right now, even in their mayor's race, where you had wide changes after election night in the results of an election. And for days and weeks later, they just keep finding ballots until the election results change. Whether you can prove fraud or not, it does undermine voter integrity in the vote. And whether they keep going through with that process, most states have their elections resolved on election night. You look at. Well, I think it's raised a lot of skepticism among voters when they see these wide changes days and weeks after the election, and you still can't get a result 2-3 weeks after an election happened. Why not have all of your elections take place on election day and have the results that night? Florida used to have problems years ago, and they fixed their problems. And now you get the results by usually 9:30 at night in a large state like Florida. It obviously can be done if you choose to do it. And if you don't, it just undermines a lot of people's faith in those elections. Yes, ma'am.
On these court petitions, do you think rebels should be able to sign on to those, or do you disagree with the tool?
I don't support that process. I mean, look, we have committees, and the committees do hard work. And, everybody's got their own bills that they might want to move. And, as the majority leader, when people come to me and they want a bill moved, I tell them, first thing I always tell them is go talk to the chairman, work through the committee process. That is what the regular order is around here. And obviously most people do that. You might not always get the result you want when you go to committee, but that is the legislative process. And that's what I've surely urged we do. Maybe we take one more. Yes, ma'am.
Have you seen members who say that reconciliation should be used to instead of the normal appropriations process?
Well, we haven't done a normal appropriations process through reconciliation. What we're doing here is, if you look at Reconciliation 2.0, the bill that's before us today, it is taking two areas of the Department of Homeland Security that the Democrats have completely walked away from. And they've said we're not going to fund it at all because they want an open border. And so as long as the Senate has a 60-vote requirement, we in the House passed a bill to fully fund the department. So it's not a House issue, it's a Senate problem. And you've seen it with other bills too. But on this front, the question is then, is there another way to properly fund the rest of the Homeland Security Department that isn't funded? Most of it's funded, but two critical pieces, ICE and CBP, are not. And so you can do that through reconciliation, and that's the process that is being used.
Thank you.
So last one. Yeah. You came here early, you're in the front row.
Right, exactly. No, representing here in the front row. As you said, the House has passed a version of FISA reauthorization. The Senate, if it passes it, is expected to pass a slightly different version. Given the idea of Bill Pulte stepping in as the acting DNI, do you believe the House has the votes now, Democrats are now off the table, it seems, to actually pass FISA over here reauthorization without, if Bill Pulte is still in the...
Well, we made it clear, first of all, that everybody has acknowledged this is a critical tool in America's national security. And if somebody wants to play games and say, well, they might not agree with an appointment and the Senate confirmation process, let that play out. But you're really going to jeopardize the national security of America over a personality issue. And so right now what we're doing in the House is saying, we're not going to play that game. We're going to properly make sure that FISA is renewed. We passed a bill to do that. It's over in the Senate. The Senate's working through that. I hope they figure it out because it's too critical for our national security that that program does not go dark. Friday night, of course, is the midnight hour, so to speak. And so we're here, we're going to work to get it done. One way or another, we have to keep FISA going because it's critical to America's national security, and it has stopped. No one disputes it has stopped multiple terrorist attacks here on our homeland. Anybody that would vote against that is putting America's national security at risk. I sure hope nobody would do that. Thank you. See you on the floor.